Daytona Speedway sure has a way of putting on a show for the fans. And boy, oh boy, did we have one last night with a surprise first-time winner. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Daytona International Speedway, the world center of racing, the track where everybody wants to etch their name in the history books and say that I won at that facility. And this racetrack has proved over the years to be very entertaining, with big packs of cars running together side by side, multiple lanes of racing. And in the summertime, it can truly be a test of the driver with heat and, handling becoming a major factor, and also putting yourself in position at the very end. And we saw a lot of that last night, a lot of big wrecks, a lot of comers and goers throughout the race. But at the end of the night, a surprise winner for a legendary team goes to victory lane. Let's get into all that went down at Daytona last night. Number 1, Burton to victory lane. Harrison Burton. That's right. Harrison Burton has won his first career Cup Series race, winning the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona last night, beating out Kyle Busch, Christopher Bell, Cody Ware, and Ty Gibbs for the victory. This is, again, mentioned Burton's first career Cup Series win, and it's the 100th win, a historical win for the team that he drives for, the legendary Wood Brothers Racing Team, that number 21 that resides out of Stuart, Virginia. They have been in the sport since the beginning of NASCAR, and they have been a staple for many, many years, winning iconic races with multiple drivers. David Pearson among those, Tiny Lund. Trevor Bayne won the Daytona 500 for this team 13 years ago at this track. An amazing and historical racing that they have been. And over the last couple of years, it's been kind of a little bit of a rough road for the team in general, where they've been good but not great. And the last couple of years have definitely taken a toll on them performance-wise. But last night, they were able to celebrate glory in victory lane with Harrison Burton behind the wheel. And Harrison Burton, I'm going to tell you what, folks, ever since he came to the Cup Series, it's been a rough ride for him. He's not had a lot of success. It's been tough with him getting adjusted to these next-gen cars. And it's been, again, a rough time for him. He hadn't even been able to finish in the top 25 in the standings the first 2 years of his tenure with this race team. And it was announced earlier in the year that Harrison Burton is not going to be back with this team next year. He's out of a job after this year for the moment. After this win last night, somebody could pick him up. But after this year, he's out of the 21 car. But last night, he put that all behind him and was able to capture his first career win. We didn't talk so much about Harrison Burton last night. He was kind of up there in the pack. He wasn't as dominant as the other Ford cars were, but he certainly was able to avoid trouble the entire race last night and put himself in position when he needed to at the very end of the race. He restarted the first car on the outside lane on the first overtime restart on the outside of Kyle Busch and was trying everything he could to get the outside lane going. It didn't look like they were going to be able to do much after it dissolved coming to the white flag when John Hunter Nemechek, about third car in lane, tried to make a pass to the outside and faded and pretty much dissolved the outside lane for a moment. But coming off of turn 2 down the backstretch, Burton got a big push from behind by Parker Retzlaff in the 62 car, and that propelled Burton to the lead and held his ground through 3 and 4 and did some defensive blocking coming to the start-finish line to block Kyle Busch to prevent him from having a chance. Now, Burton did go below the double yellow line coming to the tri-oval, but because he was ahead of the lead and he was not advancing his position, it didn't impact him whatsoever, and is able to cross the start-finish line in first place and get his first career Cup Series win. It was a big moment for him and the Burton family. The Burton family has had success at Daytona before. Of course, his father, Jeff Burton, who of course works for NASCAR and NBC, and was calling that race at the end of last night and was very excited in the booth, obviously as a unbiased broadcaster. He tries to keep, his bias for his son down, but he couldn't help himself last night. It's like Ned Jarrett calling his son Dale Jarrett to 2 Daytona 500 wins in 93 and 96, beating out Dale Earnhardt Sr., or of course Dale's first Cup win at Michigan in 1991 with the Wood Brothers team. But Burton was so excited to see his son win last night, but I don't think anyone was more excited other than Harrison himself and Jeff than Harrison's mom, Jeff's wife, Kim Burton. She was ecstatic on the pit box. And we've seen over the years when Burton got into the NASCAR scene in the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, his biggest cheerleader is his mom, Kim, where she's always on the edge of her seat just hoping for her son to be able to come out there with the best result or out on top. And, you know, last night they got to celebrate joyously, and Harrison's fiance was there, the Wood Brothers team, Jeremy Bullins. It was just a big moment for the whole. You know, it's a family thing. The Burtons have had success before. As I mentioned, Jeff Burton won the summer race at Daytona in 2000, driving for Roush Racing. And, of course, Harrison's uncle, Ward Burton, won the Daytona 500 in 2002, driving for Bill Davis Racing. So the Burtons have, again, cemented themselves as winners at Daytona Speedway. And now Harrison adds his name to that historical list of winners at Daytona that are family members. And with this win, Harrison Burton is now in the playoffs this year. The last time the Wood Brothers, by the way, made the playoffs was with Matt DiBenedetto in 2020, the first year that DiBenedetto hopped aboard with the team. He tried to make it in 2021, but just fell short. And, of course, after that year, DiBenedetto was let go from the team and brought Harrison Burton aboard because Burton was bringing sponsorship from Dex Imaging that has been with him his entire NASCAR career, from the Truck Series to the Xfinity Series. So he's bringing that sponsorship money with him to the Cup scene. But as I mentioned, it's been a rough go for Harrison Burton in the Cup Series, and he, again, will not be back with this team next year. We don't know what his plans are. Some other team could pick him up next year in the Cup Series, maybe a Front Row Motorsports that still has that third car undecided yet as far as a driver. Could be a spot for Harrison Burton to go to. Or he could go back to the Xfinity Series and try to build himself back up and maybe get back to another top-tier team in 2026. But as I mentioned again, with the win, Harrison Burton is in the playoffs. Now, as great as a win as this is, as I mentioned, Harrison Burton struggled this year. He was 34th in points entering this race last night. And a lot of people, and myself too, think it's kind of a spot wasted for the playoffs because it's eliminating another driver who has been way more consistent than the 21 team has been this year, and may not get a chance to compete for the playoffs. It definitely sucks, and maybe it's something that NASCAR needs to take a look at as far as analyzing. The win in your end thing matters most, but maybe you need to look at the drivers that can be consistent enough week in and week out, or at least are running decent enough to have a chance to be classified as a playoff driver if they win a race and they're maybe below the top 16, the top 20, anything like that. But again, I'm not going to take anything away from the win that Harrison Burton had. It's a very nice win for him, the young man himself, and get his confidence back up to say, he could still run at the top tier level as long as he has the equipment and luck to go his way and is consistent. But as I mentioned, it's not been a consistent year for him. They have struggled a lot. They've wrecked a few amount of race cars. They haven't performed well. It kind of feels like a playoff spot wasted. I mean, it's great to see him win, but I don't see him making it out of the round of 16 when it's all said and done after Bristol. But we've seen stranger things, so he could maybe prove me wrong. But I will say congratulations to Harrison Burton, Jeremy Bullins, and the Wood Brothers team on their big win last night at Daytona. Number 2, Busch falls short. Kyle Busch was so close to locking himself into the playoffs, winning at Daytona last night. He knew coming into this race, a former winner from 2008, that the draft and the opportunity to win at Daytona was there for him. And he put himself in position at the very end of the race, running up in the top 5 to 6, 7, the last couple laps of the race. He had speed in his race car. Looked to be one of the best Chevy cars out there, aside from Kyle Larson or William Byron. It looked like Kyle Busch was going to put himself in position and finally get the win. He was able to dodge some of the wrecks that we had late in the race, and he found himself the leader heading into overtime. And he got such a good restart compared to the 21 car, and the push from behind from Christopher Bell, a very fast race car, it was probably going to help Kyle Busch get himself to victory lane. But going down the back straightaway on the last lap, Burton just got the big run on the outside with the push from the 62 of Parker Retzlaff and propelled Burton to the lead. Kyle Busch did everything he could coming off of turn 4 to try to get the lead back from the 21. He dove inside, but Burton came down and blocked him to cover, and coming back up the track above the double yellow line. But again, Burton wasn't advancing his position at all. Busch just fell one spot short of winning his way into the playoffs. And now he's got one more race left, and that's next weekend at Darlington, a track where he's won it before, but he didn't perform well there earlier this year, so he's going to have to win to get in. It's all or nothing for the former two-time Cup Series champion Kyle Busch. But I will say props to him. These last couple of weeks, really ever since we came back from the 2-week summer break, the A-Team has gotten their act together and they've run a lot more competitively. Richard Childress Racing in general has done really well for themselves ever since they came back from the break. Aside from the Austin Dillon controversy at the end of Richmond, he was able to still keep the win. Kyle Busch finished in the top 15 that night. Last week at Michigan, he used pit strategy to kind of get himself further up the field, but in general, Kyle had a good race car last week, running well up at the front of the field and leading some laps and running top 5 for a lot of the race and finished there. It was a solid result. He was disappointed not being able to win last night, but you could still see, a little bit of joy in his face knowing he was able to survive the race and finish in one piece and had a chance to win and ran well all night long. There's confidence building back within the Richard Childress organization ever since the 2-week break. They had time to recoup, regroup, and just think about, what are we doing wrong? What can we do to get our cars better? They're making progress, and that's saying something. Now, again, one win next week. He's got to win next week to make the playoffs. The last time Kyle Busch did not make the playoffs was 2012, and that was for Joe Gibbs Racing, where he did win that year, but at the time we didn't have the 16-driver format, win and you're in thing. It was basically win and be in the top 10 or be one of the 2 wild cards at the time to make the playoffs. And Kyle Busch, unfortunately, was not able to run well the last couple races aside from his competition in Jeff Gordon. Gordon beat Kyle Busch by at least 1 point that night at Richmond to make it end. So Kyle is going to have to win next week at Darlington. Is he capable? Absolutely. Can he? Of course. But he's got to put together a clean race as well as the team on pit road. Despite coming up short, very impressed with Kyle Busch and the 18's performance last night. So good job by that race team. Number 3, wrecks. We had a fair amount of wrecks last night. Not like 10+ caution wrecks for that stuff. Like, there were 3 major wrecks that occurred last night. The first occurred in the early part of stage number 2, where everybody was just running double file, just riding around, minding their P's and Q's for the early part of that segment. And then coming off the turn 2 down the back straightaway, about a few lanes back, Corey LaJoie bumped into the car in front of him and started a chain reaction that sent Ross Chastain around into the wall. John Hunter Nemechek was involved, Noah Gragson, and multiple cars. Almost half the field was collected in that wreck, including Martin Truex Jr., William Byron, Kyle Larson was in it, Chase Elliott was in it, Denny Hamlin was in it, and of course he's been in the news this week. A lot of cars were involved in that big wreck on the back straightaway. Took only a couple of them actually out of the race. The 2 headlines being Hamlin and Elliott. Of course, Elliott's still in the regular season championship battle and is still not out of it, actually, considering what happened to his other competitors that he's racing with for the regular season title during the last part of the race last night. But unfortunately, his night was over with his first DNF of the season. Hard to believe, considering how consistent they've been. Denny Hamlin, of course, was hit with a big penalty earlier in the week. Got even worse for him last night with the wreck. He never really got to show what he had, honestly. Martin Truex Jr. and what could possibly be his last Cup start at Daytona, although Hamlin said, the door's open for you to drive an extra 2311 car in the 500 next year if you want to. And I think Martin Truex will take on that offer. It took him out of contention for at least a solid finish. They were able to continue, but laps down, wounded. Not the best result for the 19 team, but a lot of cars were taken on that wreck. But most of them, despite being in that wreck, were able to continue on the lead lap and run with the leaders the rest of the race. Then the second big incident we had was with under 10 laps to go in the final stage last night, where Michael McDowell, who started on the pole and had one of the fastest cars that night, was leading the outside lane ahead of Austin Cindric. And as they were going into turn 1, a little tap by Cindric on the back of McDowell sent McDowell around and into the pack, collecting Joey Logano, Kyle Larson, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, William Byron, Alex Bowman. I could go on and on. A lot of cars were caught up in that wreck. A lot of good race cars. Justin Haley, who ran up front a lot last night and led laps, had a very good race car. He got caught up. Chris Buescher, the defending winner of this race, he got caught up. Ricky Stenhouse, former winner of this night race at Daytona and the Daytona 500, he got caught up as well. And Michael McDowell, by the way, almost went upside down. Now, one of the things that NASCAR did for this weekend's race, after what happened to Corey LaJoie last week at Michigan with the flip, introduced an extra shark fin on the right side of the race car. We always have one for the left side, but we introduced a right side shark fin to try to keep the cars, in case there was a big wreck and with the speeds that they were going, prevent a car from tumbling upside down. Did it work? Well, not yet, because I got another wreck to talk about. But the wreck kind of helped that Shark fin kind of helped McDowell stay at least, halfway on the ground, and then it landed back on all four wheels, thanks to the addition of him hitting the top of the safer barrier walls. Thankfully, he and everybody else in that wreck were okay, but a lot of cars that were running really well last night and had an opportunity to try to win at Daytona got taken out in that big wreck. But it was not over from there. As we were coming down to the end with 2 laps to go in regulation, side by side for the lead down the back straightaway, Josh Berry and Austin Cindric were racing together. All of a sudden, a bump from behind by Kyle Busch sent the 4 car of Josh Berry around and collected Austin Cindric, and they went towards the inside wall, taking both out. But Berry's car got upside down, and the car landed on the roof, and as he was on the roof, the front of the car just went right in the inside safer barrier wall, and he stayed on his roof. The car did not tumble barrel roll back on all fours. It stayed on the roof the entire time until the AMR safety team got there, as well as the tow truck, to help slowly turn the car back on all 4 wheels to assist Josh Berry. He was okay, thankfully, and I was so nervous because I did not need to see another Stewart-Haas racing car have another scary moment with a flip at Daytona. Of course, last year, Ryan Preece's barrel roll down the back straightaway was scary. Now, one of the things that NASCAR did as well since the last time we raced at Daytona is they eliminated that grass section going into turn number 3 and the latter part of the back straightaway into turn 3. They got rid of a lot of that grass, and it's a way to help the cars, slow the cars down if they're out of control spinning on the backstretch, because when you get into that grass, your car doesn't slow down that much, and you can barrel roll or go for a flip. If it's paved section, it helps slow the cars down because the tires are skidding on a smooth surface and not going through grass and dirt. That prevented some guys from getting upside down the Xfinity race on Friday night, but unfortunately it didn't help Josh Berry at the very end of that race. But again, thankfully he was okay, but disappointing because he had a very good race car. He won stage 1 early in the race and looked like he could be the one to get his first Cup win and lock him into the playoffs and give Stewart-Haas Racing one more chance at a championship run in their final year as Tony Stewart and Gene Haas being partners. But yeah, a lot of big wrecks happened last night. Now, I'm thankful that Josh Berry was okay after the flip, but once again, NASCAR is trying to reduce cars getting upside down at these high-speed tracks where everybody's racing in big packs at high speeds at almost 190 miles per hour plus. We're trying to prevent cars from getting upside down. And the extra shark fin kind of worked to help keep McDowell, on the side and then land back on all fours. But the Berry flip down the back straightaway with 2 to go shows that we still got a little more work to do to try to keep the cars from getting upside down. We don't want that at all. We want everybody, we want this tight, close racing, but we also don't want any barrel rolls or flips because they are scary and you don't know what can happen in those incidents. But thankfully, everybody was okay after the wrecks they were caught in last night, but a lot of cars got taken out in some major incidents. Number 4, playoff bubble gets even more interesting with one race left. With the Harrison Burton win last night, it now leads to 3 guys being above the cutoff line as far as points concerned versus 4 guys entering the night. Recapping the bubble drivers, let's start first with Bubba Wallace, who finished with a 6th place result, had one of the best Toyotas last night, and definitely looked like he had a car that could win the race with his Columbia Sportswear Toyota. It was a very fast hot rod, but he was one of the cars that was caught up in that wreck with under 10 laps to go in turn number 1. Thankfully, the car wasn't severely torn up, and he was able to carry on and finish with a 6th place result. But post-race, he was not happy considering the 21 car, who was, again, outside the top 16 as far as points go and 34th in points. He goes to win. Bubba Wallace is the first guy out of the playoff bubble right now, and he said, I'm disappointed in myself. We shouldn't, be running like this. We shouldn't have had that result. Again, if nobody knew one last night, you wouldn't have heard that attitude from Bubba Wallace in his post-race interview. It would have been like a positive, happy guy, like, yeah, 6th place, a good result, and, we just got one more race left to go to try to point our way in. Now, he still can point his way in being 21 back, but in my opinion, I think he's going to really need to win next week because I don't see any of the guys that are above the points cutoff line right now. I don't see any of them struggling next week and being outside the top 20. It's going to need to be a win to get in for Bubba Wallace. But despite all that, he was able to come away with a 6th place result. Then the defending winner of this race, Chris Buescher, he's the last guy in above the cutoff line right now by 21 points. He had a very strong forward as well last night. He ran up at the front, got kicked to the back, was part of that wreck in turn 1 with under 10 to go, but didn't suffer much damage and was able to come away with a 10th place result. He was very happy with the result of his race team, and he's very confident heading into Darlington next week, where he should have won that race earlier this year, but of course the late race contact with him in the 45 of Tyler Reddick ultimately cut the tire down to 17. I mean, the consolation was his teammate and / co-owner, Brad Keselowski, went on to win that race, I guess. But Buescher, again, with a solid top 10 result, definitely helps him heading into next week. Then Ty Gibbs, who is carrying a special paint scheme of the new Reagan movie starring Dennis Quaid, who was actually at Daytona briefly this weekend. Gibbs didn't talk about him much last night, but at the very end, he was able to find himself inside the top 5 and finish with a 5th place result. Now 39 points above the cutoff line. You thinking that's pretty safe? It is, but you just don't know what could happen next week if a new winner gets the victory lane and Ty Gibbs maybe struggles. But a solid top 5 last night is good for them heading into next week. And of course, I mentioned Martin Truex Jr. He was caught up, unfortunately, in that big wreck on the backstretch on lap 60 and ran wounded the rest of the race last night. He's only 58 points above the cutoff line. I'm still feeling pretty good about his chances to point his way in, but all it's going to take next week is for one mistake or a mechanical failure or something to take Martin Truex Jr. out of these playoffs in his final full-time season. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to point his way in. As long as he scores some stage points next week, he'll be okay and he'll make the playoffs and get one more chance to win another championship before he decides to hang up full-time racing and just run for fun in a few races next year, hopefully. And then finally, we have Ross Chastain, who entered the night 1 point above the cutoff line, which was minding his business down the backstretch on lap 60 when he was part of that wreck, and nose the front of the car into the outside wall. And I thought, look at the damage, his night was going to be over. But they were actually able to fix the car, and he was able to run the rest of the race, albeit wounded. He fell a lap down, but he got his lap back and ended up finishing the race with a 11th or 12th place result. At top 15, given that amount of damage, is nothing to sneeze about. But unfortunately, with the Burton win, he is 27 points below the cutoff line. He's going to have to win next week. And this is absolutely mind-boggling to see a guy who 2 years ago had a historic year, winning his first Career Cup race scoring his first Career Cup win at Coda, winning at Talladega, pulling off the Hail Melon move at Martinsville to make the championship 4 and finishing runner-up to Joey Logano. It was a big moment for him. Last year was a little bit of a step back, but he was able to still win nonetheless and lock himself into the playoffs. And he won the season finale race at Phoenix. Now, he may not make the playoffs unless he wins next week. But again, 27 points back, he could point his win, but it's really going to take a win for Chastain to get in and join his teammate Daniel Suarez. So these drivers are going to be battling all the way to the checkered flag next week at Darlington to determine which of them makes the playoffs. Which of those 3 drivers could be above the cutoff line? Which of those drivers will be in the playoffs at the end of the night? I don't know. That's why we got to tune in to find out. And number 5, NASCAR drops the hammer on Denny Hamlin. Earlier in the week, Denny Hamlin and the number 11 team were faced with an L2 penalty. Now, what does the penalty entail? Well, let me pull up my phone here, and I will tell you exactly what it means. They were penalized for violating NASCAR's engine inspection requirements. The sanctioning body announced on Thursday. They were in violation of sections 14.7.1 E and F and 14.7.1.1 B and E of the NASCAR rulebook. I know that's a lot of numbers. It's a little crazy. But they were penalized for pretty much violating the seals as far as their engines. That seals must not be removed without prior approval by NASCAR. And if a race-winning engine is sealed and presented for post-race inspection at a later date with damaged, altered, or missing seals, an L2 penalty will be assessed. Now, what race-winning engine was affected? It was the Bristol race-winning engine earlier this year that was affected by this. And that means that NASCAR stripped Denny Hamlin of 10 playoff points, 75 driver and owner's points, and crew chief Chris Gabehart was fined $100,000 for violating these actions. That eliminated Denny Hamlin from the regular season championship battle. He was still mathematically alive to win that championship regular season title and get 15 extra bonus points to help him through the playoffs. Now, after that penalty, no longer a factor. He's no longer part of the conversation. Now, this could play a little bit of a problem as far as him maybe advancing to the championship for this year. Losing 10 playoff points, that's a fair amount of playoff points. You're losing pretty much 2 race wins right there. But I think the main one that he's losing a race win and 5 stage wins that he's accumulated. That's a big loss of points that he's got right there. Now, could Denny Hamlin still advance his way to the championship 4? Absolutely. I mean, we've seen him do it before. But if for some reason Denny Hamlin does not make it to the championship 4, that L2 penalty is the reason why he will not make it. But a massive penalty affecting the 11 team. But during his pre-race interview last night, he was obviously a little upset about, but didn't seem to, bring his mood down. He was still very confident in his ability as a driver and his race team that they could still get the job done, and he still feel confident that they can make it to the championship 4. Yes, it's possible they make it to the championship 4, and it's possible they get there and they win the title finally. But it's also possible, based on the penalty, depending on how your luck goes, if you have rough luck in any of these rounds, I think the round of 16 shouldn't be a problem for him. The round of 12, it's the round of 8 that I'm worried about for the 11 team. If they do not perform in that round, that L2 penalty is going to come back to haunt them, and they're going to regret violating NASCAR's engine rule right there. So a lesson hopefully learned for not only Denny Hamlin, but everybody else going forward, that you don't tamper with the engines unless if NASCAR finds out what you're doing and it's not violation with the rule book. So a big penalty handed out to the 11 team this week, and they're going to have to try to overcome that relatively quickly. A couple other news notes I want to talk about. Yesterday, it was announced that Trackhouse Racing will expand to 3 full-time cars next year with Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, and the new driver to the team next year is none other than Shane Van Gisbergen, SVG. That's right, the inaugural Chicago Street Course winner who got his feet wet in the Cup Series with Trackhouse Racing in their Project 91 car. He is going to be a full-time driver next year in the NASCAR Cup Series. I'm so excited to see the New Zealander compete in the Cup Series next year full-time. And the number that he's driving next year, how about bringing back the legendary 88, a number made famous by many, many drivers, including NASCAR Hall of Famers Darrell Waltrip, Dale Jarrett, and of course, Dale Earnhardt Jr. That's the number that Jr. got his Hendrick tenure started with, the number 88 car. He was fortunate enough to win a few races with them, as well as the 2014 Daytona 500. And then Alex Bowman took over the 88 number for a few years and was fortunate enough to win 2 races with that number in Chicago in 2019 and California in 2020. But then when Kyle Larson came back to the Cup Series and Rick Hendrick said he's going to pilot the 5 car, we're going to let Alex Bowman drive the 48 and thus drop the 88 number. But the 88's back in the Cup Series, and I love the Trackhouse design of it. It looks really, really nice. And I wish SVG nothing but the best next year. We're excited to have him full-time in Cup. It's going to be a struggle for him, especially on these oval tracks where he doesn't have experience driving the next-gen car, of course, even though he's run at a few other venues this year, including Charlotte on the oval portion. But it's the road courses that we're looking forward to see this guy shine next year. He's going to be fun to watch against guys like Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, Daniel Suarez, AJ Allmendinger, among others. SVG is going to be fun to watch next year, folks. This will be a fun year next year with him. And this weekend was also the first race for NASCAR and NBC introducing Lee Diffey to the NASCAR family. Of course, it was announced last week that Lee Diffey will be the new lead announcer for NASCAR Cup Series races on NBC throughout the rest of the season. And last night, he delivered perfectly. His introduction to the Cup scene, well, again, he's called some NASCAR races before in Xfinity and 2 Cup races in 2017, but his delivery and his, play-by-play announcing last night for his first time calling a NASCAR Cup race at Daytona, of all places, he did his homework, folks. He did an exceptional job, but great energy to the broadcast, the multiple changes for the lead. It's like it had me on the edge of my seat hearing these calls by Lee and the excitement that he brings. And the call at the end of the race, calling Harrison Burton home to the victory with Jeff sitting right next to him, that might be, so far, the best call of the 2024 season as far as finishes by a broadcast announcer. Lee delivered the finish of last night's race perfectly. I mean, round of applause to him. He did a phenomenal job. A lot of people, I'm sure, had questions about Lee Diffey being a NASCAR announcer for NBC. I'm thinking a lot of them are very, very satisfied after what he did last night. So, Lee, great job last night, and we're so excited to see you hear you call more races throughout the rest of this Cup Series stretch for next weekend's elimination race and, of course, the 10 races in the playoffs and the championship finale. So, great job last night, dude, and we're so excited for you being with us in NASCAR. Now, it all comes down to one more race. Next weekend at the Lady in Black, the track too tough to tame, Darlington Raceway, one of the most historic tracks that we go to every year. Pretty much goes back to the early days of NASCAR. This track has been there since the beginning. This race, the pivotal race, the Cookout Southern 500, a crown jewel event. It's one that everybody would love to add to the racing resume for people that have never won it before. And for people that have won it before, they'd like to get another one added and say, I won it not once, but I won it multiple times. But next weekend also will determine which drivers will make the playoffs. We already know the 13 drivers that are in on wins. 3 drivers are currently above as far as points right now and can point their way in next week. But there's also the possibility that somebody else new that's either above or below the cutoff line can win and lock themselves in. But all we know is that next weekend, 3 spots are up for grabs. Which 3 drivers will make it into the playoffs for 2024? And which drivers will be left on the outside looking and wondering, boy, what did we do wrong? What could we have done differently to be in this year's playoffs? All I know is get your popcorn ready, get your barbecue ready, get your drinks ready, because Darlington is going to put on a show next week to determine which 16 drivers are going to be in this year's playoffs. So I hope you all are looking forward to this upcoming weekend's race, and I hope everybody in advance has a great start to their Labor Day weekend on Friday, being able to celebrate all the hardworking people in our country and what they do, providing a living for everybody. This weekend's a time to step back and just celebrate, being a hard worker and just go have some fun, go to the beach, go to the park, go, to the pool, have, grill outs and everything. I hope everybody has a wonderful Labor Day weekend this weekend, and I hope everybody's excited for Darlington on Sunday night. So have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Harrison Burton and the 21 team on their big win at Daytona last night. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!